In the previous tutorial, we set up this scene so we could produce variations of the materials for this product. And we ended up using a geometry node setup that could cycle to the different materials and then keyframed that. So we're going to extend this process so that we can actually use this as a template, assuming that you would have more products that you're probably going to be producing variations on. In this tutorial, we're going to cover just a lot of workflow things that you can get just really stuck on. There are a lot of tutorials that do really fun, visual, glitzy things with geometry nodes, but this is all about practicality. So our starting point is basically the end point of the last tutorial. So we have 3 scenes, each having variations of our product setup. We had keyframed the geometry node setup down here, where we changed the index at every second interval. So we're going to go ahead and delete the keyframes because we're going to adjust the geometry node with a more automatic way of handling this. Let's also go ahead and let's just come over to the geometry node. Let's just come down here to geometry nodes. And since we have this set up, we want to go ahead and save this as an asset. So we'll just come up here, right-click, and then mark this as an asset. As part of this process, we want to take some of the resources that we're using and abstract them so that they can be referenced by multiple files that we're probably going to be generating from this scene template. So that means coming in and selecting our primary object and looking at the materials. We've essentially got 3 material slots on here. We've got an interior metal, the metal ring at the top, and then the body itself, which is what's being swapped out and varied according to the geometry node. We're going to be taking all of our materials and moving them to an external file for reference to other files. So we need to remove any references here in the geometry node to these current materials. And then when we come over, we can remove all of the geometry that we currently have, with the exception of the lid. We're going to be reusing the lid. So I'm going to come over here to each of my scenes, and we're going to remove, delete hierarchy, these components, which are the geometry minus the lid, which we want to retain. So let's come back to scene 1, and let's come up here to the display mode, and we are going to look here at the blend file option. And when we come down to materials, we can see these materials. Now I've added a fake user to these. So for instance, we've got inner metal, add fake user, and then we've got metal ring, add fake user. I want to protect these because I've removed any of the items that were referencing these resources, and I want those to stay there protected until we move them to an external file. So we're going to go ahead and save this file, our working file, and create a new general file, a blank file here. Let me remove a couple of things that we don't need. Delete hierarchy. But unlike most tutorials, I'm actually going to leave the default cube, and we want to, let's come down here where we've got the timeline. Let's turn on the asset browser. When we go down to current file, we don't have anything. So I'm going to come up and append. We want to find the last file that we had saved, and we come in and we look for its materials. Okay, so here we go. We've got all the body colors, and we've got the interior metal, and we've got the metal ring. So we are going to import these metal ring and interior metal, all these parts that go on the actual product. We're going to append these to become part of this file. So when I select here, you can see that we now have these imported in. The 0 next to the name means it's not currently being used as a data block by anything else. So we want to do something to protect that. We could either add a fake user, or we can turn it into an asset, which is what we want to do. So let's come back over here. Let's come back down to blend file here in the outliner. Let's come down to materials, and we are going to select all of these components, bring up the context menu, do a mark as asset, and then those appear to the assets of this file. So they're currently internal to this file, but we need to make these available as an asset to other files. So we're going to save our file, I've created a folder called Variations Material Assets. Inside of here, we will save this, and we're going to call this Product Materials, something descriptive, and that gets saved. Now, come up under the Edit menu and down to Preferences, and we need to tell Blender that that folder and that file are going to be assets that we want to make available to other documents. In Preferences, come down to where it says File Paths, click plus, and then navigate. It's automatically thrown me up into this directory. So add this directory as an asset library. Now we want to make sure that our import method is set to link. In this particular case, for what we're doing, we want these to be linked. So in case we need to make any changes to the source, that change can propagate through any files that link to it. Okay, so there we go. So that is saved. Let's go ahead and open back up our working file. So now, if we come back in to materials, you can see that we've still got these here. So these are the internal ones that we don't want to be there anymore. So we are going to clear fake user, and then when we come up in our master working file to clean up purge used data, we can delete all of those internal ones because we're going to reference externally. Let's come back up under Preferences, and we will see that we now have this as a referenced set of assets in that directory. Now that directory could have multiple files, and Blender would look at every file inside of this folder, and if any of those had anything marked as assets, they would all become available to any other file. So let's come up here. We've currently got geometry nodes. Let's switch this over to the asset browser, and let's look at what's available down here in variations of that material assets, and there they are. So they're available for us to reference now in our main working file. Let's come in now and reconfigure the geometry node. So I don't currently have a file that we wanted to assign it to, but that's totally okay because we can just use any object. So we'll come back down to geometry nodes here. In fact, we'll just take the ground plane, click New. We will bring up this material cycle. So again, doesn't matter for right now. Let's come back into the main view layer so we can see everything in the outliner. We need to tell it to replace something. We want to give something an abstract name. So currently, I'm just going to put a new temporary slot here, and I'm going to create a name called Swap Me Out. Something like that. That's now in the database of materials for this file, so we can reference that, and we can say, okay, this is what we're going to want to swap out, and I'm going to remove it from the ground plane. Again, I was just using that for temporary purposes. Now, when we come over here, we don't yet have access to those externally referenced materials. So we need to actually bring them in. Let's come back in to the asset browser, and I'm going to do Shift and S, cursor to world origin. We want to bring that back down anyway. I'm just going to create a dummy object that I know for sure is sort of a dummy object, just to have it here to bring materials in. So again, these aren't going to be seen by any internal data structures until we actually apply them. Remembering that we're going to be linking them. Okay, so it's just following what we've set as a preference. So I'm going to come over here and drag that here, and you can see it's right here. It's grayed out because it's externally referenced. That's all we need to do. Then I come over here and I drag the next one, and then I drag the next one, and I drag the next one until we get all of those in. So now all of these are here, and it tells me where they're from. So L means it's linked, 0 means it's not actually being used by anything yet. So let's go ahead and come back over to the geometry nodes. Again, let's just click to create a reference to our primary node here. Again, this is the great thing. It's just, it's an asset that I can temporarily apply to anything. Now we can come in and we can apply these externally referenced materials. There's red, and then finally yellow. Since these are now being used as data blocks by this geometry node, we can safely remove this. And I don't want it applied, obviously, to the ground, but it's an asset. So those changes that we just made are stored internally as an asset for this. Before we want to import the first object in, we need to prepare it a little bit. So let's come over to our products directory, and we're going to import tall. This is the one we're going to use to test everything out and get set up correctly. If we come down to the asset browser, we already have the assets because we've already set the preferences up under file paths. So that's good. We have access to the materials that we need, but we need to configure this now. All of my objects have sort of consistent features. So as an example, there's a metal ring at the top, the interior is a metal, and then the exterior is one of these repeating materials. So we need to quickly configure this so when it comes in correctly. So let's come over here and give 3 material slots. And let's press the A key, and let's come up to the top one right here, click Assign. Now, something super critically important is that for this material swap thing to happen, that material must be in data mode. It cannot be in object mode. So for instance, if we come up to Preferences and we come up under Editing, you can preset materials to be applied in either object or data mode. Object mode is great because it allows you to apply different materials to instances of an object. But the downside is that for what we're needing to do, the geometry node will only access the material if it is in data mode. That's super critical. So we'll come over here, and I'm just going to give this a new name of temporary material. We don't even need to worry. It just needs to have a slot right there. Let's come down to the next one, which is going to be the ring at the top. And let's just marquee across the top. And we will assign to that slot. That will be the metal ring. And then the interior, double click, and then expand selection until we get that. So let's come down here and assign those polygons to this slot, and then the interior gets assigned there. Okay, so that's all the preparation work we needed to do. We're not actually assigning any of these materials yet. That's being done back in the main file. The only other thing I want to bring your attention to is that I've modeled it so its origin is right down here at the world origin. So as far as bringing it in and consistency and knowing exactly where it's going to land, all of my products have been modeled so their origin is right there. Okay, so let's come back in and grab our working file, and then we can come in. Let's grab the target. Let's call this products right there. File, link, and then we will come to our products, find tall. It is inside of a collection that we will access called tall there. There it is. Now you may say, Chris, we can also use this as an asset and bring it in as an asset. But there's one critical thing that won't happen if we do, and that's library overrides. For some reason, library overrides don't work on linked data coming in as an asset. But we can do it if you manually link it externally like we're doing. Let's do this. Let's come over and bring up the context menu, come down to Library Overrides, Make, and then come back over to Selected and Content. And you'll note that when we do that, we gain access to the internal data structures. But note that when I come down to Materials, it shows us, but things are still grayed out. So you actually have to do it one more time. So come down, Library Override, Make, Selected, and Content. And look at that. Suddenly we gain access to being able to swap out the materials up here. But the important thing to remember is that we can still access this as an external file. That's kind of the whole point, is that you have a library of things that you want to reference into other files. So for instance, one of the great features that Blender has that is turned off by default is that if you come under Preferences, and let's go to the new extensions, there is a thing called Edit Linked Libraries. It's not enabled by default. Just do a search for it and install it and link it. They're probably going to make you download it from the new repositories, but it's a feature of Blender. It's just not turned on by default. So even after turning this into a library override, if I press the N key and then under item, we come down, you can see it says Edit Linked Library. If I click this, we now have access to the original file. And if I need to come in and make any changes or do anything to it, I can make those changes. And if I've got this linked to multiple files, then that will be updated. You just do return to original, and we are back to working at setting up our variations in the main file. Now let's also say that you want to make a change to the material. Let's come back down here to the asset browser so we can see our materials. One of the gripes that I have about the way that assets are done in Blender is that you would think that you could select a material here and edit it. You can do that in other 3D applications, but that's not how Blender works. If I need to make a change, you have to go back into the original source file. Now, they let you do that. If I right-click here, you can see it says Open Blend File. And when you do that, it will open up a duplicate of Blender where you can come in and make changes. So, for instance, I would need to come over, drag a material, because again, you can only add a material on an object, and then you could come in and make a change. Let's say I wanted this value to be, let's say that I wanted this value to be 0.4 on all of my materials. Then you would do this in the master Blender file, knowing that that change is going to propagate to all the files that happen to link and reference this. So then we would just save that, quit. We jump back immediately to the master blend file, and I've noticed that you have to kind of force it to relink it. So let's come back down here to blend files, and then come down here where there's an external link, it says product materials. Just right click this and force a reload on it. And then those changes propagate in. It's slightly cumbersome, but again, it gives you the benefit of being able to have one source of materials for many multiple files that need to reference that for consistency purposes. So if we come back over, let's look at this. Now that this is selectable, we can actually come over to our geometry node editor, which I have down here, click new, and then bring up that material cycle geometry node. And remember, we're going to use this material called Swap Me Out. So now that we've done the library override twice, I think that's a glitch, but it's what works, is that we come up here and we say swap me out. But again, remember, it's got to be in this data mode for this to work correctly. It doesn't seem to see materials that are applied in object mode. Let's look at the timeline. Let's expand this out so we gain clear access to each second. The next thing that we're going to do is make an adjustment to the geometry node setup to automate this process of cycling the materials. So let's come in here right now and take a look at this. We can see that, in fact, I'm going to bring this up top. We animated in the previous tutorial the index along each frame boundary right here of our timeline. We can actually automate that. So Shift A, type in time, and it says scene time. Bring this over here. I'm going to disconnect. So now we can come over to frame. We want each frame to be a driver of the index change over here. So we take frame into index, and as we move from 1 second to the next second to the next second, that will drive the change and cycle of materials here as that's being driven into the replace node. So let's come over here and take a look at this. The first thing to note also is that the scene time starts at 0. And so we need to change the start time, and then we need to change the end time by 1 frame to match up. So if we come over here and we take a look at that, now we can come over and we can see that in fact it cycles automatically for us without us having to keyframe anything. So now we're ready to transfer this to the other scenes. So let's do this. Let's come over and let's go out of interactive rendering. If we remember, when we come over to scene 2 where the lid is on the side, and then scene 3 where the camera is up and the lid is on the side, we need to figure out how to get this data that we've just configured, gone to all this work to get it over there. And it turns out there's a very easy way of doing that. If we come up to this windowing environment, come up to the little object menu right here, come down to where it says link transfer data and do link object to scene. We want to link to scene 2, and then let's do it again. Link object data to scene 3. And then when we come over to 2, there it is. And then when we come over to 3, it's moved that over for us. So if we turn on the renderer, now something's going on there. Let's go ahead and take a quick look at this. Oh, I see what's going on. So remember I said that we have to start at frame 0. We don't, anything past that is just going to be white because there are no more materials. So let's come over, reset to 0, and then our end frame should be 5. So we come over here and then we can cycle. So that's the change that we need to make for each of our scenes. Let's come over to 2. So we need to set the start time to 0 and the end to 5. So that's important. But there we go. So now all we need to do is, it looks like I think I might need to make a small change here. So just see, I think that needs to be moved right there. And let's do the same thing for scene 3. Move that so it's up against there. Okay, there we go. So now we've gotten those plugged in, and you would just follow that process for all the variations that you've got to do with products. You have the separate file for the product itself. Make sure you have the material slots assigned, and then one of them just needs to end up being assigned to swap me out so that the geometry node knows to use that to cycle out the materials at every 1 second interval on the timeline. So then the final thing that we would do is come to our 4th scene, which is where we do in the video editor all of the renderings. Let's just go ahead and reassign these just for practice purposes. And we need to start at 0. Let's do that. Let's come over here, come to the beginning, shift into A, scene 1, come over here, shift into A, we import scene 2, and then 3, shift A, and then we have scene 3, and then we just need to pull this back 1, there we go. And this is ready to render. So you would just begin rendering, remembering that we have to find a place to save renderings, and then you would start your render process. So I wanted to go over this because while this is powerful, man, there are a couple of things you have to be really careful about to make sure this works correctly. Otherwise, things will seem really glitchy.